Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last session before Jenny Bu's lecture. So this session will be on digital world building and digital social spaces. It will be moderated by David Ma, Senior Lecturer in Architecture and Urban Design here at the University of Melbourne, and myself, Leire Asensio, also Senior Lecturer in Architecture and Urban Design here at the University of Melbourne. And we'll have guest speakers Helmut Kinzler joining us from Zaha Hadid Architects, where he's Associate Director, Head of VR at Zaha Hadid VR Group. And we'll also have Eric Wong, who is an architect, joining us online from London as well, Senior Lecturer and Production Designer at Eric Wong. I'll pass it to David to introduce the session in a bit more detail and also introduce the speakers in more detail. Thank you.
Okay, so you can hear me? Everybody can? Okay, so today's session will be really looking at the ways in which architects are beginning to engage with this shift. So we are now seeing that there's a gradual shift, or there's a bit of a shift of our social life to the virtual world, and we're starting to see, I guess, developments in that space which are now starting to, I guess, have the capacity for even more of a kind of design or architect's input. So we invited both Helmut and Eric to come in to give us their takes on the ways in which architects can contribute to this discussion about building social spaces online. And how the kind of skills that they bring as architects and designers to this task, and this, I guess, a larger discussion about building social life online. I'll just introduce very quickly the two speakers. We've got Helmut Kinzler, who joined Zaha Hadid Architects in 1998, so he's revealing his age there a little bit, as a designer and project architect, and subsequently worked on a series of important architectural design and exhibition projects, including the Rosenthal Center for Contemporary Art in Cincinnati, the Fano Science Center in Wolfsburg, and the Tokyo Blossoms exhibition in Tokyo, Japan. His current focus is in the development and realization of high-end residential projects. Besides his work as the associate director in the firm, Helmut founded the company's virtual reality department in 2015, and it was founded for researching and developing the technology for applications to in the practice of the virtual reality, I guess. The ZHVR group have developed solutions for the practice's emerging VR design workflow, including immersive design techniques and networked visualization tools for internal design evaluation and external presentations. The department's main focus is in the development of a comprehensive understanding of cybernetic architecture. The ZHVR group has published articles and essays and is involved in a Horizon 2020 multidisciplinary research project. Additionally, the group has contributed projects to several public exhibitions showcasing the VR technology and the practice's design work. Together with Helmut, we'll have Eric Wong, studied architecture at the Bryn Shaw School of Art, Central St. Martin's, and Cardiff University, and later graduated from the Bartlett School at the UCL. He has many, accomplishments to his name, and including all of these accomplishments, he's also been involved in education, where he's a design tutor who has taught at the Bartlett and the University of Greenwich at both the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. He's been widely published in the Reba Journal, Architects Journal, Blueprint magazine, Vice. It's been exhibited at the Design Museum, the World Architecture Festival, and Sir John Soane Museum, amongst many others. I think the project that he'll be talking about primarily is the one that he did as a production designer for the Oscar-nominated director Mamoru Hosoda's. He was a concept artist and production designer for that, for the anime motion picture Belle, looking specifically at the design of the virtual social world known in the film as You. So without further ado, I guess we will start with Helmut, his presentation.
Hi, David. Hi, Leire. Nice to see you. Nice, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's relatively early here in London, but I hope you had already a good start. Thank you also for mentioning my age. I appreciate. I've been around, and I think having been around for a while, experiencing the transition from a purely manual, paper-based, physical reality-based workflow design experimentation to a fully digitized, computerized workflow is not something I would say is invaluable, but has definitely its merits. I would like to start my presentation now. I can't hear you or see you, but so I would assume that I will just dive into my PowerPoint. Let me do this 1 second. I mean, if I could ask for some feedback, if that's possible, if you can see my screen, I do hope that is the case.
We can see it.
Yeah, okay. I hope this is working. Is there any way that you can give me some feedback? Otherwise, I will. Yeah.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
working.
okay. Sorry, I just didn't want it to talk into the void. Great. So yes, we, as David mentioned and Leire mentioned, we've started the VR department right at the beginning of the last hype cycle, the last launch of affordable VR technology, but have been all involved in the design work in Zaha's practice. So we're all trained designers and architects by trade, but then having obviously acquired the technological skill sets to work in this new domain. What we are looking at, and this has been obviously a process of various experimentations and projects, we're now looking at a combined reality sort of framework. We're not looking purely at virtuality as an extension to our physical reality, but we are also, as David mentions, trying to understand the dynamic, the special nature of this new domain and how it relates to our physical presence, our physical reality. And we're looking at a fusion of those augmentation spaces and realities. We launched 2 articles a few years back that kind of gives the whole idea, the whole outlook on how our economies are affected by in the information technology, how our thought processes are embodied in the way how all of our cultures have been transformed. Obviously, neuroscience and cognition has also added very much to an understanding that literally critiques at the end of the experiment, of the modern experiment. So we're looking now at the principle dialectic between and the human condition, ultimately the individual and the collective. And I think the work that we're showing today is also related clearly to the topic of today. So simulation has been clearly something that has been in our discipline, in our work, an important aspect that we can approach our construct, our projects in a way that we can eliminate our kind of mistakes and our in vision, sharpen our vision. But what is at the core of it is the individual. And this is something that VR has given us a new insight into our space making, into our processes, that with the advancement of having a personal insight and point of view, a dynamic point of view, we can choose, we can select, and we can inspect our constructs on a much more deeper fundamental level. This is an art work from a Chinese artist that I always very much like to show, showing that we are stepping into the plane, right, into what we've normally been stuck with, the projection, the 2-dimensional screens. And the point of view, the personal individual point of view, has been an issue and a topic in the modern experiment, as well as in the early Renaissance. And this is a Cedric Price drawing where we are seeing a helicopter view of a project and ultimately indicating the individual vista. This is work from Zaha, early drawings and paintings that I think also really very much is something that we found very fond of in sort of history and the developments of our practice, that she has already sort of preempted the dynamic view the dynamic multiple views in superimposing different perspectives. This is another project where we can clearly see that she is not settling on a single perspective, and the projects in the space are dynamic. This is a video of something we've done at a very early stage, visualizing a painting project from the 1980s of Zaha, turning it into an experiential, immersive, virtual reality experience. And this is fascinating, that we have suddenly a shift in the paradigm, that we can ultimately experience these projects, not just as works of art, or as paintings, as two-dimensional projections, but as actual spatial experiments and architectural projects. Moving on, again, coming in from a timeline of our own departments, of our own experimentation, the individual point of view was pretty much predominant in the early stages, where we have single headsets, single viewers. This is a visualization for a project in Taiwan that we've done, and is experienced through a single person. And obviously we can multiply this with multiple headsets, but the experience is not a collective one. I'll jump through this, we have a lot to go through. Now, coming to the collective, and this is another set of diagrams that we've done in a project that I will also come back to later, is how we construct virtuality, how virtual space will have to be constructed from ground up. Nothing is there, there's the black void, and we would have to bring in a strata, a mechanization of how the context will have to respond to us. We're associating the shadow with the sun, and we have our own physical reality to thank for, that there is no such thing as a full construct needed. In VR, this is the complete opposite. And having multiple people and the context responding to a collective, to multiple individuals, is something that we were highly aware of and also experimented with. This is an early project, Project Coral, that was done in the art space in a modern art museum in Mexico, where we had four sort of a micro network, four individuals immersed in a virtual design space. They were able to spawn individual components, scale them, place them inside that space. And we ended up over a period of 2.5 months with around 16,000 of those components being placed in this sort of emerging sculpture. This is a video showing you the kind of genesis of that emerging sculpture. And you can see there's clearly no real construct, no overarching framework in the way how the aesthetics, how the formulation of this structure is being developed. But the interesting aspect is clearly that these four individuals at a time, and ultimately we had 2,500 people inside that space, leading to sculpture which is the size of Manhattan effectively. And this is within 2.5 months. So I think this is giving you some sort of proportion, some sort of scale, some dynamic aspect to what can be done inside that virtual space. This leading to also the ability to extract these virtual dimensions back into physical reality. So this was done with Hewlett-Packard, 3D printing out a screenshot, as it were, of that emerging, transforming spatial construct. We have then also clearly challenged the idea of design agency. As we have multiple individuals immersed, proposing and perceiving their own personal point of view, this ultimately leads to a critique to that kind of autocratic, monopolized authoring discussion. And also, in a way, what simulation means for a design process. Where do you stop the simulation? Where do you start executing? Where do you see the final result? Ultimately, this is extremely relevant now in flux. David mentioned the research project we have with the European Union and several academic partners is ultimately the consequence from these experiments, these early co-authoring, co-design, single immersive design space experiments. And Prismark is sort of the notion of having to look at our design processes in a new way. We're looking at very changing, very flexible constellations of design specialists, of parties coming together, congregating, processing, simulating these projects over time. These are sort of the idea of different design stages and how the teams emerge, how the teams evolve. Even before the inception of a project, we are already accumulating knowledge. At the end, after completion, we have operation, we have post-construction processes, archiving, academic research. All these things fall into view. Now, sorry, I was jumping. Now, this research project looked very deeply into the workflow and the software platforms being used in our industry. We have 3 AEC partners inside that research project. And what you can see here is a diagram, a kind of a mapping out of all these software elements, looking at virtual and immersive qualities on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis, kind of a timeline, a typical design stage timeline. And what we draw from is that it is highly fragmented, and we have a lot of bottlenecks, a lot of incompatibilities between those software platforms, ultimately showing us that we're extremely siloed in our industry. And ultimately what we're saying, the cybernetic design collectives, our general collectives, will have to be very closely looked at and studied, how we can break those molds, how we can congregate and optimize communication, optimize the simulation processes, having a much shorter response time and input into these general discussions. This means ultimately that we have to construct a new design collective, understanding also the boundaries that are needed to protect our IPs, to generate these sort of think tanks that are then embedded and nested within larger collectives. So individual users, clearly one of the hallmarks is that begin with talking about the sort of monadic entity, the nucleus of these spaces, to larger entities that are within these design discussions. Now, the virtual user, and this is not just the designer, this is not just the professional, this is also clearly extrapolatable to a general virtual collective or society, has to have a complete sphering entity for himself or for herself to be protected, to have an identity, to have authentication, to have a wallet, to have economy tied to the individual, to the avatar that will be then inside this virtual space. Now we are looking at how these booleans, how we talking about these different sphering levels are interconnected, how information is passed from one to another, ultimately looking at these Web 3.0 constituent aspects. Now, we've ventured into looking how this design simulation space, how the authoring, how assets will be created, and how this space will be in a way distinguished. So we have 4 core classes. One is the immersed human. We have the design assets, the experiential object. We have user interfaces clearly needed to navigate, to operate within the virtual space, and metadata. And all these are related to one another and have to be transparent. Yeah, so this is what we're looking at. We look at virtual worlds now emerging, straight coming out of gaming, of chat rooms. And as David also says, that we're expecting this to become a design domain, and a commercial design domain for us, since the technology and the bandwidth have been increasing, and to extent that we can really have some level of resolution and fidelity to it. But by 2030, we're expecting about 8.5 million people to be involved in these immersive worlds. And I'm saying the word metaverse, but obviously these are networked virtual immersive spaces. In conjunction to that, there are non-player characters, AI-based entities that are either just stand-ins, I mean, what you would have in movies, to populate areas, to simulate presence, but also entities that will help generate content, that will help the human avatar players to navigate the space and to add narrative elements, or even just to do maintenance or any other form of boring menial work inside that space. And the surface area is predicted to be around 10 times the surface area of the physical planet Earth. So there is definitely something, it will happen. The question is how and who will be authoring this. Now, we've been approached by commercial clients to map out what this type of metaverse will need. And this is just already showing how the extent of the scope will almost literally explode. Where we're looking at the physical humans, how they interface with the lightly gray box, which is the virtual space, and the sequence of spaces, how to onboard, how to get into this space, and then also what are the entities that are being inspected, used, how this connects out interoperability wise into neighboring metaverses. Then there is a backend to it, and below, I think most importantly, aspects that are about world making, society making. We're looking at all these systemic qualities such as legal matters, education, ethics, economy, governments, health and safety, art and fashion, etc. All these values that have to be looked at for each of these spaces or transitional spaces. Now, talking about this substrate, this is not yet about spatial design. This is about facilitating, creating the environment, the infrastructure for such virtual spaces. As I said, VR doesn't have anything given. Our planet doesn't exist in VR, and we will have to construct it. Now, one of the biggest problem at the moment is the actual capability, the scaling of this. Computer games that are the origin of these virtual spaces are not made to host, now more than 15,000 co-present humans. But if we're looking at really hosting a world which has then multi-directional, non-narrative, non-entertainment based realities in them, economies, we would be looking at the million mark. Now, we're working with a technical partner that has just literally blown away the 200 avatar limit. And this is the early stage of the development. And we're very confident that this will allow us then to host large scale, scalable worlds with over 1 million users. And this is what we would need to do that. Coming to a sort of a proposal to what this metaverse would look like, our proposition is to have a stacked world with different natural themes and daytime time zones that can be connected into from global users. And these are just some conceptual images of how this would feel like. Obviously, we're looking at generative kind of urbanistic entities that are responding to demand and transportation system. This is now a networkable sort of impression of the onboarding home space. And this is the realism that we would expect to have as space makers, as designers, to not go into sort of cartoonish, abstract or distorted kind of realities. We would like to see really kind of an atmospheric realism there. And this is just a test, so we test different lighting conditions and to see how the quality will respond. I think I'm running out of time, so I just wanted to just proceed on. As I said, we are very much monitoring what's happening in the gaming world. I just wanted to sort of highlight the two current developments. These are both new generation games. One is Death Stranding by Kojima, and the other one is a development called Star Citizen. Now, there are two different directionalities. One would be a strictly authored, polished, closed-ended game and environment, entertainment space that is highly artistic, extremely polished, and really an artwork in itself that you can join in, you can immerse yourself as a user. The other is the open world concept that is now in 10 years in development, crowdfunded, and it's unending. So there is no necessarily a clear idea how this will end, how this will be closed off. So there's something in there in both of them. And we would hope that in our worlds that we will be designing, we would have both aspects present. Now, just to talk about and to finish some of our ideas. So cybernetic architecture will be sitting in both of these sort of antagonistic realities and also creating a blend between them. So we haven't talked about augmented reality, but ultimately what we're seeing is that the authoring process, as well as the realization, as well as the consummation aspect of these realities, is a cyclical one, is iterative. So design ultimately never stops. We will always see further developments, further ideas being injected, and we hope that this will lead to a more and deeper understanding of optimizing design and localized design ideas. The next thing is clearly the autopoietic aspect, that we will see that the individual and all of these aspects that are in a way civilization building aspects come into place in different scales, in different aspects. And the third one is clearly that we have to create this space, this virtual space, in terms of its fundamental construction and constructs in a way that we have fundamental immersive rights. This is a proclamation that we're strict on. We need to have experiential authenticity. We have to have emotional privacy, behavioral privacy. And then we're talking about all these dimensionalities that we can experiment with in this new domain. I want to thank you for listening. I hope I didn't go too fast, but this was quite a bit. And yeah, thank you very much.
Just to start off, while you going to ask questions, to maybe start off the conversation, is first of all, it's fantastic to see I guess there are two different angles in which architects are thinking about or approaching this engagement with this relatively new engagement, I'd say. One very much telling us very kind of detailed, rigorous consideration of what it means to practice within this realm and all the aspects associated it, and one a very immersive kind of detailing of what it means to actually be doing it somehow. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think that was fantastic. From my point of view, it's quite interesting to see that it certainly looks like a very exciting job, perhaps more interesting than architectural design, but I noticed that you were asked to design a city in 4 days, so it's a more punishing schedule. I don't have any specific questions, but maybe later you might have one specifically for them.
Yeah, sure. Again, thank you very much. The presentations were absolutely amazing, mind-blowing, and extremely inspiring. My first question will be, perhaps, you are both architects, and it will really be, what skills as architects do you bring to this question of the virtual social spaces? Very succinct.
Sure. Go ahead. So, should I? Sorry, was this directed to us?
I think so, but maybe you should say something about it.
I think it's interesting because you have game designers and everyone sort of speculating on the virtual realm, but what we practice is this idea of scale to the personal body. We understand that. We understand the historical context of cities, that certain cities are built up for a certain reason. Like the Great Fire of London happened in London for a reason, and then we have certain buildings that we have now. So we have a sort of context historically, culturally, and architecturally to build these worlds to a degree. Whereas sometimes certain worlds might be pastiches in the virtual world of what we have in the real world. So people might just build a pitched roof house in the virtual world, or design the equivalent of Chinatown, or wherever it might be out there. But it's our opportunity to go, actually, what do we need as users online? What could that be? How can we speculate that and build something new? And in the virtual world, it could be quite exciting to have something quite different to what we experience here.
Maybe I can also add. My sense of this would be to say, as a mission statement, we architects tend to work not just as artists, as single creators for a single perception or a single point of view. We work for multiples. We work for a collective, right? We want to have the society to enjoy and to live in those spaces that we create. I think that's one of the key differences from, let's say, what I would call an artist-driven approach. Not saying that there is a sensibility, but I think also in terms of the creation process, we have now a very specialized level of industry. We need to collaborate. We need to manage those processes that are manifold. You're working with the film industry. This is one of the most rigorous levels of compartmental and fully organized kind of workflows, right? It's a whole industry that sits there and contributes to this production. And I think as architects, we have understanding of aesthetics, but I think there's also a deeper connectivity to our traditions and what you say, our sort of personal, in a way, a kind of a formulation of a construct that ends up being space. And I think that's something quite special that comes from 400 years of building and making spaces.
Thank you very much. Do you have
well, there's a couple of questions from the audience, so I'll let them ask their question first, and if there's a lull.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I think we have time. So actually, more questions coming for you guys. The first two questions by somebody anonymous and by someone called Rosario seem to revolve around the same subject. This one is for Eric. Spectacular work, first of all. Was there a team involved or just yourself? That was the first question, and there is a related question as well, the one of that both the anonymous audience and Rosario is asking is, what software do you use to create this amazing virtual environment without killing your computer? That's literally what this person is asking.
Sadly, it was just me. It was me in my bedroom, lonely grafting.
Actually, and 3 questions related to what software do you use that is not killing your computer, literally.
Surprisingly, it's an old school program called MicroStation, which is quite an old, dated architectural CAD program. If I'm being fair, it just so happened that it deals very well with lines, and a lot of the stylistic approach I had was to do with just vector lines and post-production in Photoshop. So, and the approach was modulated. So a lot of it was this idea of cells and referencing and keeping my file quite low. So repetition, modulation as a technique, as an approach to it, helped lower the file size, and the program's relationship to the stylistic approach helped. So that was it really.
We can really tell you're from London. You use MicroStation. Okay. One thing that perhaps we can go back to the questions, but one of the things that I was wondering could be good to get from both of you is, certainly what are the opportunities for architects engaging with this medium, but also, as any engagement with new medium, there are also constraints that maybe we don't understand that are associated with this medium. So it'd be interesting to know from you guys, what are, in both cases, the opportunities, and also what are the kind of limits that we need to be mindful of when we're engaging with this new medium.
Well, maybe on that note, so I mean, the technologists talk about the big stack problem. I mean, obviously hosting real-time, immersive, live, 3-dimensional immersive spaces takes a lot of computational power. If you network that, you have the problem of replication. So you need to deliver the content to the end nodes, to the users. And the more fidelity you're expecting, the more resolution and atmospherics and interaction, the more the computational load will go up. And I guess we're still in the early days in terms of having that level of resolution, that level of realism. Thank God we architects are used to abstraction, and we are used to live with compromises and ideas that can later then grow into full-fledged environments. I guess film also has the benefit that it works offline, right? So the presentation ultimately is a baked product, but it's not immersive, it's not interactive. But these metaverses or microverses that we're talking about, these are real life environments for individual POVs and dynamic experiences. So the benefit of having a game engine kind of skill set clearly is there. So that's where it starts, and it will also channel through that technology, through that industry. And our colleagues, my team members, they all have Unreal Engine. We decided to go with Unreal Engine because it has the most impressive kind of visual qualities, apart from the other game engines. And yeah, so we kind of keep pushing that envelope. Networking, I mean, there's a lot of technology then involved into getting streaming, pixel streaming going, and UI work. I mean, we now, as I said, we work with storyboarding, so these experiences are pre-programmable to some extent, but there's a different skill set added to our normal development pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's the amazing thing. I think what Helmut said it right, just right. Is I think what he's doing is amazing because those are opportunities that are being offered to architects, and he's really driving that forward. I think us as architects, the one thing that we do lack is being able to make that jump into that realm, or to test these different boundaries, and to have that business mind. We're very self-indulgent people that just design and I guess predominantly get taken advantage of in some industries. So to be able to be able to navigate that and to have a bit more insight into that is great. And I think what you're doing is amazing, Helmut. So.
So I'm just going to hand the mic. There's a question from the audience.
Thank you both for the very interesting presentation. Just a question. I mean, it was really interesting to see how us as architects are entering to the world of entertainment, and we can create wonderful movies. I was just wondering, given that we are creating social spaces in these movies, is there any way that we can use this back to help the real world to address some of the issues related to social installations or inequalities that we see within social spaces, and use this technology to bring it back in to real life? Or is it just going to stay as architects' contribution to the world of entertainment? Thank you.
I mean, we've given this a lot of thought to what extent technology, our entire humanity and history and evolution of technology has brought us into the current situation, and how we will progress in the future. And I think to some extent, our current reality, our physical reality, our situation, political situation, ethical situation, is a reflection on the use of a relatively new technology and the technological level. To some extent, what we've experienced now with Web 2.0, I mean, the Facebooks, the Googles, etc., have influenced our behavior, our culture, our society, our understanding of one another, to that extent that we have clearly seen the flaw of what it is we feel we can do with technology. And clearly, when we go into a three-dimensional, real-time, dynamic, personal web space, we clearly think that there needs to be boundaries, there needs to be privacy, there needs to be human rights that have to be established. We cannot remain commodified, that we have 20, 30 companies looking down on us, what we're doing. At the same time, we're just browsing the internet. So there is clearly a reflection there, and that should also ultimately come back out into reality. I mean, what we've proven in our project Coral was to say we can actually screenshot something back into physical reality. And I think this is literally a metaphor for what we think will happen to our culture in our physical world. And there's sort of a kind of a loop back and forth from what we do with our constructs, with our theories. I mean, the sort of Platonic backhand that VR can offer us to say, okay, we are the ones that create these realities, but what are we going to do with it? What does it do with us? And how can we reflect on it and improve our conditions rather than deteriorate society and political systems?
Yeah, we undoubtedly have the opportunity to shape that. And just from my experience talking in regards to the film and director's outlook, was that, you know, the film before in 2009 was a blank canvas space. It was a frontier. So, and the film was about hacking and systems and viruses, but now it's a lot more dense, it's a lot more convoluted, people everywhere, and he wanted to put a more positive spin on this virtual world about people coming together, and he actually made the film because he saw his daughter growing up in the digital age, and he goes, you know, I can't actually stop her from using the internet, so I wanted to embrace it positively. So we have the opportunity to shape a more positive virtual space, and then that can definitely reflect in the real world too, and that goes through in the film, in both the real and virtual world, through his storytelling and through his characters. So yeah,
I hope this answers the question to some extent. I mean, obviously we have to stay quite abstract, but I think there are some real world implications that we have to look out for our users and for ourselves, for sure. Absolutely. They're mandatory. They're basic rules that have to apply. Otherwise, we're going into either a circus or having some sort of inhuman environment where, yeah, we're being abused and commodified.
Are there any other questions from the audience here? Just making sure. No, there are no more. Maybe I have a last one. I think we have a couple of minutes. I have just on a different note. Actually, I have my microphone. Okay. We keep using the handheld. I think it's the habit that I have the other one. Helmut, there was a part on your presentation that I also found fascinating where I mean, it was a big part of the presentation, but when you were starting to basically explore VR as a tool for collaboration with other disciplines, I wanted to see, basically, I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, because I thought that was really powerful and you know, all the potential that it has for our for the design disciplines, really. And I was wondering if that's something that was primarily conceived as a way to generate the virtual world, or something that will become a platform by which you could collaborate and that could be extracted into the outside world.
The real world. Okay. Well, I think this the answer to that question, I mean, to the last question, is completely ambiguous. So when we talk about cybernetic architecture, we talk about authoring into a full extent of realities. So we could author something that sits in both realities. I mean, we've done a pilot project called The Loop. So far, I don't know, you could look at our website. It's a 23 channel surround sound system, which ultimately creates a spatial virtual sound space. So you have a part of it sitting in the physical reality, which is a sofa, a lounger, with an enormous amount of speakers surrounding you. And at the same time, you can enjoy a virtual sound space. So this is something that sits in between both realities in our understanding, and it will only work, I mean, conceptually, if it has something like a framework that we call cybernetic architecture. We have projects that are completely in virtual space, but also some of them that will have just manifestations in the physical reality. As I said, we have AR projects where we could extend physical space with virtual space and personalize physical space with information that is tailored to you, to your language skills, to your culture, to your age, etc. So I guess we are looking at a full extent of reality as a bandwidth for our work. When we collaborate, and this is another maybe historical phenomenon, and I think me coming from the day and age of paper and actual physical collaboration, I remember in our office where we had tables next to one another and we worked on a project. I think that kind of immediacy has the benefit of having arbitrary connections, synaptic kind of events happening in our cultures, in our societies, that has been pretty much severed, and we've been isolated by technology. We've been looking at screens, and also now during the pandemic, remote working has sort of really catalyzed for me the need to say, okay, if we have to go through a digital process, how can we enable collaboration? And this is a very pragmatic kind of starting point. But then when you actually look at far distance communities coming together in a virtual design information space, you have the immediacy, not just between the humans, the immersed human collaborators, but also the data, the assets being part inside the same space. So we have the immediate benefit of a very readable, accessible level of information exchange and absorption, and then again reiterating your design process, your discussions. I think there's sort of the driver behind it. But authoring could mean that you have a project in virtual space, and digital twin is something sort of a word that has been propagated in our industry, where you can have operational data, metadata kind of in sync with physical reality. So there is no constraint either or, I mean, where it would end.
Thank you. I know I'm going to push it, but there is one last question from the audience. How much physical sketching do you do before moving on to the 3D, or do you skip this altogether and move right onto the 3D?
I think that's not for me.
I think sketching is the most important thing. I think it's really important. I do it on my train journeys to and from work, and that's the only way I can be efficient with my time. And you have to get on paper, you have to visualize it, I think, and once you get the bigger picture, yeah, you can start going for it. Otherwise, it's very hard to just start from, yeah. The sketch is so...
What I hear from this question also is that sort of, again, the way how we've been limiting ourselves technologically. I mean, our design space that we envisage holds all formats, right? You can have a hand sketch, but you can also have 3D sketches. I mean, all these things sit and play out in the same language. I mean, it's kind of lingua universalis that we're kind of dreaming about, because why do we need to switch between different things if we can have them in the same way, in the same space? Ideally.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Again, it's been an amazing session, so thank you.
Thank you.
And now, before we leave, thank you to all of you for attending the first day of the Future Design Research Symposium. We are now going to have a 30-minute break before our final session, which will be the Robert Garland Treseder Fellow of 2022, Inlays, Loose Fits, and Other Puzzling Forms of Assembly by Jenny Bu, who has come from Los Angeles, is co-director of Euler Bu Collaborative and faculty at the Southern California Institute of Architecture. The session will commence in B117 Theater at 6:30, and you do not need to pre-register for that lecture. You can just go in with. Thank you very much. Okay.